what punishment was like for Vikings. If you step into a world where fierce, brutal warriors and blood-soaked legends like the Vikings dwell, you would think they're above the law and can easily escape every crime they commit. But there's a saying that the wages of sin is death. Well, not death per se in the Viking, but the punishment they get for a serious crime they commit could be worse than death itself. Over time, the Vikings have captured our imagination with their tales of conquest and exploration. But, of course, their colony isn't as free as we often think. In their realm, anyone who committed serious crime wasn't left unpunished. It was a world where conflict was resolved not with mere fines or imprisonment, but with displays of raw power and vengeance. However, the punishment was seen as a display of art, more like the way to showcase their strength while depicting honor. It was not merely a tool for correction, but also a means to restore balance and maintain peace in Viking society. So, from the infamous Blood Eagle to the dreaded ordeal of the hung meat, get ready as we explore the shadowy world of what punishment was like for Vikings. The Genesis. The Vikings, also known as Norsemen, were seafaring people that came from the Scandinavian region, present-day Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, during the late 8th to 11th centuries. Seeing through their history, you'll find out that it was marked by exploration, expansion, and raiding. The Viking Age began with their first recorded raid on the English monastery of Lindisfarne in 793 AD. Driven by a desire for wealth, land, and adventure, the Vikings established a reputation as fearsome warriors and skilled sailors. They swiftly expanded their reach, venturing as far as Greenland, Iceland, and even North America, long before Christopher Columbus. Aside from raiding, the Vikings also engaged in trade, establishing trade routes across Europe, connecting distant regions and influencing cultural exchange. They were skilled craftsmen known for their intricate metalwork, wood carving, and shipbuilding. The Viking era began to decline in the 11th century due to various factors, including diminishing resources, internal conflicts, and pressure from Christian kingdoms. As the Scandinavian region converted to Christianity, the Viking Age came to an end, and the Norse society transitioned into a more settled and unified feudal system. The origin of how the punishment came to be. In pop culture, the Vikings were commonly referred to as the uncivilized savages, but they were a complex society with a well-defined judicial system, even though they didn't have a formal belief system. One of the things they were known for was called the Thing, or a Thing, which served as a governing assembly at the local level. This assembly was responsible for resolving disputes, maintaining peace, and controlling violence during these periodic gatherings meant to solve problems. The gathering of the Things was often led by the king, and during the gathering of things, all free men and Vikings would come together in their communities to enforce the law. Each of the things had a law speaker, who knew everything about the law. After the recitation, the law speaker and the local chieftain would judge and settle the cases of dispute after hearing. In the Viking Age, the influence you had in the community determined how much weight your words carried during important matters. So, although all free men of the community had a say, things were often influenced by local powerful families, who likely held significant dominance over the proceedings. At this time, taking responsibility for one's actions was highly valued, and if someone committed wrongdoing, they had to admit it before the assembly. Interestingly, killing someone in their sleep or stealing was seen as dishonorable, while killing someone openly in battle as an act of defense was considered honorable. So the Vikings then had a higher chance of getting away with physically harming someone rather than stealing their belongings. A fatal walk. In our modern society, there are clear distinctions between different types of killing, such as premeditated murder, intentional murder, and manslaughter. However, in Viking law, the lines weren't as clearly defined. Killing someone without fair warning was considered a despicable and monstrous act, while engaging in a duel and killing someone after challenging them in public was seen as honorable. Even in cases of accidental killings or manslaughter, one had to take responsibility for their actions and not flee. They were expected to obey the council's decision and pay the compensation imposed for the offense. But if someone was caught murdering another person in their sleep or without any warning, the consequences could be severe. They might be subjected to a punishment known as the fatal walk. The fatal walk was reserved for high-profile murderers and was truly horrifying. The executioner would open the prisoner's belly, allowing their guts and their intestines to spill out. Somehow, the person would remain alive, enduring hours of excruciating agony. They would then be forced to walk to the execution site, often a tree, with their spilled guts trailing behind them. If the prisoner was lucky, they might die during this ordeal, bringing an end to their suffering. But for the unlucky ones, even more torment awaited. The process could take a painfully long time, drawing out their agony. So, at this stage, praying for death to come quickly was always the best thing to do. The Veil Hay. According to the sagas, if someone was caught stealing, it was actually preferable to be killed for it rather than facing other forms of punishment because the alternative methods were even more painful. Capital punishment was not defined by a set of rules among the Vikings. Sometimes it resembled a makeshift court, where villagers would construct gallows to hang the guilty party until death or simply cut off their heads. Though executions were extremely rare in Nordic law, hanging was more common than beheading, which was mostly reserved for slaves. These methods were not just considered a very quick way to end a culprit's life, but were also viewed as the most shameful ways to die. The reason for this perception came from the Norse belief in Valhalla. According to their beliefs, dying in battle with a weapon in hand was necessary to secure an honorable place at Odin's table in the afterlife. Those who didn't meet this criterion, like thieves or individuals executed by hanging, were unlikely to reach Valhalla and were believed to end up in a realm of evil and death known as hell. However, if the assembly decided to punish someone differently, they might subject them to a form of torture known as Veil Hay. This experience would reduce the guilty person's status and reputation while they were still alive. Hung meat. Imagine having to walk past a butcher shop and glance at the meat hanging there, right? Well, that's where the hung meat punishment originated from. It's just exactly what it sounds like. Meat hanging by its tendons using hooks, just like in those old-fashioned butcher shops you'd find in the countryside. In Scandinavia, they took this punishment to another level. Instead of using ropes to tie the ankles of the wrongdoers, they would employ knives to create holes in the victim's tendons. Then they'd pass a rope through those holes and string them up upside down, just like hanging a rope. The crazy part is that the people who suffered this punishment were still alive and had to endure the whole ordeal. Once the punishment was over, the guilty party would be cut down and declared an outlaw by the Thing. Their property would be seized and divided among the communities. Now, these punishments were extremely rare and only used by Vikings in extreme cases. Blood Eagle. This is one punishment that was reserved for the rarest of the rare escapes, just as gruesome as it sounds. The story of the Blood Eagle it's a well-known story involving Ragnar Longborough, a prominent Viking leader. So after Ragnar was captured and king by King Al of Northern England, his sons were out for revenge. They launched an invasion of Northumbria to avenge their father's death. Once Northumbria fell, Ragnar's son, Iafar, the Bonus, decided to inflict a terrible fate upon Aella, the king of Northumbria. Nowadays, there's a lot of debate among scholars about how the Vikings actually carried out this gruesome ritual torture. The process of the Blood Eagle is just so cruel that it's almost unimaginable. The victim's hands and legs were tightly bound to prevent them from escaping. Then, the person seeking revenge would take an axe and skillfully stab it into the victim's back, starting from the tailbone and moving upwards towards the ribcage. Then they would separate every single rib from the backbone. The level of brutality is beyond comprehension. The poor victim would have their internal organs exposed to the world, and they made sure the person stayed alive throughout the whole ordeal to ensure they had enough of the suffering. And as if that wasn't enough, they would use sticks or anything sharp to scrape wounds just to intensify the agony. The ribs would also be detached and spread out like huge fingers, giving the impression of wings on the victim's back. Now, you might wonder why they would do something so barbaric on Earth. Well, there were a couple of reasons. Firstly, they believed it was a sacrifice to Odin, the father of the Norse gods and the god of war. Secondly, and perhaps more believable, it was a way to honor fallen warriors. According to Viking sagas, this earl named Lonauer defeated a guy named Ella in battle and then tortured him with the Blood Eagle as a form of vengeance. So, you see, there was some form of motivation to such a harsh punishment.